Okay. Oops. All righty, so we're going to look at the story of Ruth and Naomi tonight. And there's sort of four theories about their relationship. And what we'll do, like we did last time, we talked about David and Jonathan, and I'll just kind of introduce these four different theories. And, not to say that these are the only theories about Ruth, ideas, but just here's some that, I came across in my studies, and feel free if you have others to share those. One is that, Ruth and Naomi were lesbians and they acted on their love for each other sexually, that they had a relationship, and that, they just sort of did what they needed to do in their time, but that they were very much in love. Then another theory is that they, may or may not have been sexual, and we don't know that necessarily, but that their relationship did reflect this all-encompassing connection and devotion, that there was, I think in our group, we've sort of talked before about the gender-bred person, and we looked at this notion of attraction, and we have kind of different types of attraction. We may have a sexual attraction, but we also have a romantic attraction. And, whether or not the sexual attraction was there, there was definitely a romantic connection, and some sort of a connection that was beyond just friendship. Another theory about Ruth is, and we'll look at Ruth as queer in the way that she opposes the heterosexist patriarchal structures, and she sort of centers herself and Naomi in terms of her actions, and what they do is so that she can provide for herself and also Naomi. A sort of final theory, and this is one that myself, being in a relationship with two other people, that I think is kind of interesting, that I just sort of had came across today, was this notion of Ruth, Naomi, and then Boaz, who will meet, as sort of coming to define what it means to be a family with their sort of queer triangle. And there's sort of three folks that are involved in this relationship, and they each have very different purpose and functions. And, it's just not something that we think of as sort of now as sort of a traditional, man, woman, kind of nuclear family as we sort of describe it. So we're going to look at those four different ideas about Ruth. And what I want to do is just introduce the story for folks who may or may not be familiar. And I found some really great Chagall. Chagall is a French impressionist painter, more like not necessarily impressionist, more primitivist at times. And so these sort of accompany the story here. So this is an excerpt, or sorry, some of this is just sort of my general summary, and then we'll have some excerpt with some of the actual scripture. But in Ruth 1, Elimelech, who and his wife Naomi and their two sons traveled from Bethlehem and Judah to Moab to escape famine. Elimelech died, and the sons married Moabite women, and the name of those women were Orpah and Ruth. And you'll notice it is somewhat unusual in a lot of the stories that we've looked at previously for every single woman character to sort of be named. We talked a couple of weeks ago about Lot's wife, and we don't have a name for her. We talked about the Levite's concubine. We don't have a name for her, but we get the name for Naomi, Orpah, Ruth. What happens in the story is the sons also die, and Naomi, this is when they were living in Moab. She heard this, so there's sort of famine coming to Moab as well. So she heard that and this is from the scripture, the Lord had visited his people and giving them food. And so she sought to return to Judah. She told Ruth and Orpah to go back to their mother's houses. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find security, each of you in the house of your husband. And Naomi kissed them, and they wept aloud. They said they would go with her, but Naomi told them to turn back. Remember, we've talked before in this series about how, women were in a very precarious situation in this time period where they really were sort of almost the property of their fathers until they had husbands. And it was very important that if their husbands died, then they were sort of on their own if they didn't have sons. And so we see Ruth and Naomi both not having any sort of male protector to have to fend for themselves. This is not Chagall, but this is another piece I found. So in Ruth let's see, I'm going to see. So this is Ruth 1:14-17, and this is pretty famous passage that gets used a lot in marriage ceremonies. So then they wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." So then we continue on in Ruth 1. When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, Naomi said no more to her. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Call me no longer Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So Naomi returned together with Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, who came back with her from the country of Moab. They came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. So let's just stop for one moment there, and I want to underscore a couple of points that are raised thus far in this passage. What is Ruth's nationality?
Is she not an Israelite?
No, Ruth is not. You see it a couple of times here.
Moab?
Yeah,
Wait.
she's a Moabite. Yep, exactly. Yeah, she's from Moab. And there's a lot of question about why the book of Ruth is even in the Bible, sort of what the purpose of it is. And in sort of my teaser for this, I talked about like immigration justice, and the Moabites and the Ammonites were like pretty harsh enemies of the Israelites. And so there was a lot of animosity towards foreigners at this particular point in Israel's history. And so it's believed that this is sort of a story that sort of almost like Jesus telling the story of the Good Samaritan, because the Samaritans and the Jews were very much in conflict at the particular time that Jesus told that story. We sort of have this almost redemptive story about this Moabite woman that sort of, like back during the Cold War, it would be almost like if you had someone telling like a very positive story about a Russian person or something like that. I'm trying to think of a decent analog for our time, but so sort of the story of this Moabite woman, and we see that she eventually is the grandmother of King David. And so there's a lot of question as to why this sort of emphasis on Ruth being a Moabite, and it's seen as sort of a way to maybe a story to stop some of the nationalism and some of the way that they were really just all really pushing against and saying Moabites are terrible people. And we're going to look at that in a little more detail later, but I did want to raise it at this particular point. Something else is like the word Ruth means kind of like joy. I'm sorry, Naomi has a very positive meaning. And then when she says, "Call me Mara," Mara means bitter. And so we definitely see, Naomi's kind of really upset about what's happening. But Ruth, sort of pledges to stay with her to the end here. Let's pick up. So before we start in chapter 2, I want to give a little more history, and because we're going to come across a concept that people may not be familiar with, and that's this idea of gleaning. And so gleaning is the custom of following a harvest so that What remains might be used primarily for the poor who have little or no means of supporting themselves. And we see in the Levitical code, we see two instances, because remember when we were looking at the Levitical code a couple of weeks ago, you sort of almost have two duplicate sections and there's a lot of overlap. But here we see two different sections where it says, when you reap the harvest, don't do the whole thing. You're supposed to, and don't gather the gleanings. That's the stuff that sort of falls by the wayside. You're supposed to leave them for the poor and the sojourner. And then Deuteronomy has a similar commandment. And so, we sort of think about when we were talking about, same-sex relations being outlawed in Leviticus, we can also maybe just remind people of, well, if we really want to follow Leviticus, then we really need to kind of maybe look at our economic system, because we're not really following some of the notions that Leviticus calls for with regards to our economic system. This is another Chagall. This is Ruth at the gleaning. She's got the wheat over her shoulders. So this is in Ruth 2:1-12. So they're there in Judah area. Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a man of great wealth, whose name was Boaz. Naomi tells Ruth to go out in the field and glean. Ruth ends up in a field owned by Boaz. And Ruth asks Boaz if she can continue to glean. He tells her to stay here with his maids and tell his servants not to bother her and to give her water. And then Ruth falls on her face, bows to the ground, and says, "Why have I found favor in your sight that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" So we see kind of that little bit of that, hey, why are you doing this? Because I'm a Moabite woman, you're supposed to be my enemy. But Boaz replies to her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has been fully reported to me, and how you left your father and your mother in the land of your birth and came to a people that you did not previously know. May the Lord reward your work, and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge." So later on, Boaz offers food to Ruth, where she sits beside the reapers. And Boaz commands his servants to continue to let Ruth glean and not bother her, and even to purposely pull some grain from the sheaves and leave for her. And Ruth told Naomi, and Naomi was pleased because Boaz was a close relative. Let me just take 1 second to sort of talk about the concept of the Redeemer. And there was a sort of the Levirate marriage concept that you had, so that a woman would be taken care of, that the close relative was then supposed to take her on as his wife and take care of her. And so I think what we see is Naomi is kind of scheming here to make sure that she and Naomi are taken care of. And so Naomi is trying to, sort of entice Boaz to maybe find Ruth attractive, and maybe then, but technically Ruth is not the close relative. Naomi should be the one that Boaz is redeeming or taking on. Let's pick up in verse 21. Then Ruth the Moabitess said, "Further, he said to me, you should stay close to my servants until they've finished all my harvest." Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It's good, my daughter, that you go out with his maids, so that others do not fall upon you in another field." So she stayed close by the maids of Boaz in order to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. We have a little bit of a hint that, it could be somewhat dangerous for someone, like Ruth, to be out gleaning in the fields. We see many times, it's very important. It says, do not disturb her, do not bother her. And so there's some veiled reference that it might be dangerous for Ruth to be out there. So we sort of have to appreciate that, Ruth is really probably risking a lot by staying with Naomi and continuing to go out and do this work. And we'll get a little bit of a clue later on as to the fact that maybe Ruth had other options. So here we have the threshing floor. We have Boaz lying here, and we see Ruth kind of lying at his feet. And this is in chapter 3. So Naomi tells Ruth to get all dolled up. And I sort of use that expression, sort of that Southern expression. In the Hebrew, it says, wash yourself, anoint yourself, put on your best clothes, and go and lie beside Boaz on the threshing floor. Don't make yourself known to him until he's finished eating and drinking. And then Naomi tells Ruth to, quote, uncover Boaz's feet. And we're not exactly sure if that is a literal meaning, or feet also is sort of a euphemism for genitalia. So there may be some scheming by Naomi for Ruth to get Boaz in sort of a compromising position. We're not quite clear. And I think we see evidence in this text, like we did in others, as the Hebrew scholars look at it, that there do seem to be some multiple drafts, to where we may have a hard time knowing exactly what the original story was. And we have a lot of different editors coming in, overlaying their opinion. Okay, so Ruth does as commanded. Boaz wakes up startled and asks Ruth who she is. It's dark. He probably doesn't recognize her, can't see her at that point. And Ruth replies, I am Ruth, your maid. So spread your covering over your maid, for you are a close relative. The word could also be translated as redeemer. Then Boaz says, may you be blessed of the Lord, my daughter. You have shown your last kindness to be better than the first by not going after young men, whether rich or poor. Boaz tells Ruth that he will redeem her if the closer relative does not do so. And he gives Ruth 6 measures of barley to take to Naomi. And so then this is what I call the throuple, which means just sort of 3 people and a couple. It's just a very different family dynamic that we end up with at the end. So Boaz goes to the closest relative and offers him the chance to redeem Naomi, which is what, because of, he goes to Elimelech's land, and the relative, may be interested in sort of doing what needs to be done to redeem Naomi. But then Boaz says, well, you also have to redeem Ruth. And at that point, then the man was worried because I guess Ruth probably was of childbearing years, that would sort of affect his inheritance and sort of his own heirs and his children. So the man refuses. Then Boaz gets the right to redeem. So Boaz redeemed Elimelech's land and took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her. And the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer today, and may his name become famous in Israel. May he also be to you a restorer of life and a sustainer of your old age, for your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. The neighbor women gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. So they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. So we see sort of the very tangled, as we might think about it, sort of family coupling here, because, he goes into Ruth, right? At least Boaz goes into Ruth, but then enables her to conceive. But then the women say to Naomi, blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer. And then, your daughter-in-law who loves you is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. And so then Naomi becomes the nurse. So it's just kind of interesting. So as we go back to the 4 theories about Ruth: lesbian lovers, romantic love, Ruth is sort of a queer icon, and then redefining family, then we can sort of talk now about, how the different parts of the story maybe support different ideas there. And just curious what y'all thought about that. If anybody has any other kind of ideas that came across for them. And if you want me to put up any particular slide with language, just let me know and I can do that, and we can talk from that as well.
We're just outspoken on Ruth and Naomi.
Well, one of my closest friends in seminary is a lesbian, and she and her wife have been together for many years. And I was just asking her, kind of what she knows about the story. And she was saying, well, yeah, it's, I don't really, I haven't really looked at it in great detail. I know that every lesbian wedding I've been to, this is a very prominent passage. And I think it also is at a lot of just weddings generally, the things, where you go, I will go. So I think that's definitely that those words of commitment, I think are very, resonate with a lot of people. But I don't want to put you on the spot, Nikki. I don't know, have anything, if that's something that, you're well familiar with the story, have any insight or anything that you can add? I don't want to distract you while you're driving.
Yeah, I actually missed a little bit of it because I was having to pick up the kids and all. So I'm gonna have to.
No worries.
I was gonna ask if there was a way to go back and look at the slides and all.
Yeah, I can send the slides to you. You're talking about that. Yeah. Yeah. What's your familiarity with the Ruth Naomi story? What have you learned about it, or is that a story that has particular importance or interest for you or anyone?
I've never looked at it as far as the aspects that we're looking at it tonight. I just assumed they were friends and stuff like that. I just never turned it to look at it as far as in this context and all.
Yeah, we always have to be careful about trying to make the Bible say something that it doesn't say, and so we can't say yes, they absolutely were lesbian lovers, whatever. But then we also have to sort of think of the fact that a lot of some of these stories, we can at least say, well, they had a very close relationship that is sort of reflective of a relationship that sometimes two women have with each other, and we see sort of the beauty in that relationship and the way that they were willing to stick together in a very patriarchal society where women didn't have a lot of opportunities, and they kind of did what they needed to do in order to take care of each other and take care of themselves. And I think it would have been really easy for Ruth to have abandoned Naomi. And so you have to always think, well, why was she so attached to Naomi? Was willing to leave her family and where she'd grown up her whole life and then follow her to, something that did seem probably pretty dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how familiar was everyone with sort of the story with Boaz and the, uncovering his feet, and that was kind of an interesting thing, because it seemed like in some ways it's kind of odd that he seemed like he didn't recognize her, because there was so much in the prior. And, if you read the whole thing, there's a lot where he just goes out of his way time and time again to make sure that his servants are taking care of Ruth, and that she's not being bothered, and that she, has water and she's got food and all these things. So he definitely seems like he had sort of taken a shine to her. So it's just kind of interesting then, and on the threshing floor, that he sort of almost, when we look at that language, it's almost like he doesn't seem to know who it is in a way. I'm Ruth, your maid, spread your covering over your maid for your close relative. So it's, I don't know, it's just kind of interesting to me here, this kind of story. And because, he really wasn't the redeemer for Ruth. And that's one of the things that's really perplexed a lot of scholars here is, Ruth had under sort of the typical Levirate marriage laws where, if you're married and you have, your husband dies, your brother has a responsibility, or a close relative has a responsibility to kind of redeem you, kind of to provide for you. And that right would have been extended to Naomi, but it really was not something where he had that obligation to Ruth. And so that's one thing that is a little bit interesting here, where, you know, the law, I think, was sort of clear as to how that worked. But then you had this exception, this very clear sort of exception outside the law, where because of everything that Ruth had done, somehow then she, you know, gets the protection of that. And it becomes sort of a thing where Boaz, you know, sort of uses that then to trick the closer relative out of redeeming Naomi. That's very interesting. And then, you know, also that family situation at the end, to me, was kind of really interesting, where they, you know, they have this child and it just becomes sort of Naomi's child as well. And they just sort of have this family unit of everyone sort of taking care of each other and doing, you know, having a particular role. And it's not, you know, kind of the story a lot of times gets used to, you know, I think because there's sort of some clear lesbian undertones in the story of the romantic love, then some very conservative folks have taken the story and really run with it the other way and says, well, no, this is really a story about the beautiful love between Boaz and Ruth, and Naomi's just sort of like the match, and sort of relegate Naomi to this matchmaker, you know, maybe even scheming matchmaker, and kind of push aside Naomi. Whereas I think when you look at the end of the story, you do see this sort of very blended family concept that, you know, is not sort of our traditional man, woman, child. Doug, any thoughts you have?
Well, I had recently read that part, and right off I thought about that it was a gay relationship, and it was kind of beautiful, and it was kind of great how they ended up taking care of each other. And then when circumstances, they did what they had to not be apart.
Mm-hmm.
You know, by getting with doing the whole Boaz thing, and you know, doing it the acceptable way in order to keep what they had. So that's what I got out of that.
Bill, anything you want to?
Not really. I thought Doug really put it well. You know, there's so much of the study that we're doing, going through these Old Testament chapters. And I realized just how much of that I had never really experienced or remembered or whatever. It did not stick. My memory of Ruth and Naomi was, you know, just a real dedicated, close friendship relationship. Is what I had filed that away in my brain, I guess, at the time that I was first exposed to it. But yeah,
you know, as mother and daughter-in-law relationships normally are. No.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this is very much like contrary to like a normal, you know, like a mother-daughter-in-law relationship is normally like antagonistic to an extreme. You know, it's and not that, you know, we necessarily can, you know, kind of project our, you know, kind of current ideas on things about that. But I don't know why the dynamic would have been that much different, you know, because definitely at the time, the, you know, woman would have gone and left her mother's kind of family and then been with her husband's family. So I do think this stands out, you know, just sort of in that regard.
Well, I find it interesting because the way they did it back then, you know, you didn't get married because you loved them.
Yeah.
Or you didn't form a relationship like that. So I find this interesting that out of love, this all happened. Mm-hmm. Instead of going, no, you got to go here, you got to go there. Which in reality, she should have done what she was told in the beginning, and she didn't.
Yeah. I mean, that is a great point, because when people want to talk about, oh, marriage is, biblical marriage, when we look at this example and other examples that we've looked at in these early Jewish history, we've seen that marriage is very much a property kind of issue. It's like, the woman is property, and the father sort of owns her, and then he sort of sells her for a dowry to the husband, and then the husband has that responsibility. And there wasn't love, like you said, there wasn't really love, didn't matter, like that had nothing to do with it. It was all about property. It was about taking care of women, and some of these rules had nothing to do with kind of love. And so when people want to compare marriage and say, well, Jesus uses this marriage metaphor as being like the groom and the church is the bride, and they sort of hold it up as this sort of marriage concept as this sort of ideal. We see in this part of the Bible just really a very different approach to marriage and a very different purpose for marriage than what you had in first century, than what we have now. And if you said, hey, where's the real love and connection and devotion and all these traits that we associate with marriage, that was not in that Boaz Ruth relationship, that was in the Ruth Naomi relationship. So
Right.
And that's spot on.
Well, I have 4 daughters-in-law. So would you like for me to tell you anything about that, with my relationships with them? And it's good, but it's not what Naomi and Ruth had. No.
You don't have your daughters-in-law coming and saying, your gods are my gods, whatever you do, I will.
I have had none of them to want to live with me. No.
And take care of you. And
yeah. But I have all my life thought of Ruth and Naomi as being strong women,
mm-hmm.
which I don't see much of that in the women in the Bible. Mostly the Old Testament Bible. New Testament, right. I might have some that I think are strong, but I felt like that they identified so much with each other because they were so alike in their personalities. And maybe Ruth knew if she stayed behind what she was in for. Maybe the choice to leave was stronger than what she would leaving behind.
I don't know if Andrew, Jason, Jade, if any of y'all want to jump in with any thoughts on this particular topic. The next thing I wanted us to spend a couple minutes talking about is going back to this, to this notion of gleaning. So what do y'all think about this particular custom? And, we have, the Bible talks more about gleaning. The Old Testament talks more about gleaning than it does about, a man shall not lie with the lyings of a woman. So why aren't we focusing more efforts on these particular verses? I mean, have y'all heard any sermons ever on these verses?
No.
No.
They're not controversial.
They're not controversial?
No.
So you think we're applying these verses?
No.
I think this would be incredibly controversial. I think when anytime, this is incredibly controversial. Like, we have debates going on in this country right now about the child tax credit, right? So sort of the fatherless, the widow, the sojourner, so we have all sorts of debates about, to me, like, if you were to say that
I'm talking about controversial as far as morality is concerned.
well, I think
But I can see that you would still make an argument that this could be morality based. So
well,
never
see, I
mind,
think
I'll retract that.
well, no. I think that we have a misguided notion of morality that somehow morality is that what is more important is sort of this personal morality versus a community morality, like a communal morality, a social morality. So if I if I am sexually immoral with someone that is consensual, that somehow that is a bigger crime than having a system that imprisons 50% of the African male population at some point. Right. If we're talking about morality, I think there's different ways that we frame morality. Instead of personal morality, and we sort of have like societal morality. And I think what we see a lot more that we ignore are all the Old Testament verses that talk about what is moral, what is socially moral. And I think these verses on gleaning, if you were to try to pass a law that says, all farmers, all, large ag companies have to take a portion of their crops and give it to the poor and the widow and stuff like that. I think that would be very controversial.
Oh, it would cause a riot.
All about the money.
Yeah. I mean, I just think for me, like one of these things people talk about, well, Leviticus, I'll say, well, Leviticus has a lot more to say about gleaning. So let's talk about gleaning, and you just can kind of distract, I think a lot of times to try and go head on with someone about some of these things, may be counterproductive. But I think if you kind of can pivot on some of these things and say, well, okay, that's fine. There's 2 verses in Leviticus on that, but let's talk about gleaning. They'll be like, what? I mean, I don't know. Had y'all heard of gleaning before as a concept?
No.
I have.
You have?
Probably in the past, but it's nothing I would go and study up or say, oh yeah.
Yeah, like I think probably you're right, Jade. Like in context, I probably had heard of it and could have figured it out from the from the passage, blah blah. But if you just said, hey, gleaning, I'd be like, I don't know. It sounds like if someone's
That concept would really go against what my understanding of some of the prosperity religion viewpoints, because you would then be interfering with God's punishment of the poor for their sins and so forth, and taking away from the blessings that you've been given because you're so good.
Yeah.
So yeah, there would be a lot of people upset.
Well, I've heard the passage used to say that people should work for what they receive, as far as them working to pick up the remaining crop, which is kind of a far stretch for this.
I mean, that sort of presumes that there's stuff out there for them to be able to gather and stuff, I guess. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Interesting thought.
But that assumes that they're saying that the work involved in gathering the remaining crop that was left behind, that it was work, and so that people have to work for what they receive, which is going against any kind of social programs. Those are the people that are anti pretty much anti New Testament. as far as I'm concerned, because that's exactly what they did in the New Testament, without any kind of like requirement for working.
Like, you mean like when the Holy Spirit told them to give everything they had to the church and sell it, or
Yeah,
is like,
yeah.
there's a many
Everyone was taken care of, and there was no like, nowhere does it say everyone worked. It just says everyone is taken care of.
but then when they use the verse like every joint supplies or whatever, or like what you can do is, you know, work, what's your definition of work? You know, laboring in the field or serving, you know, whatever, I don't know. This could be a long topic. But if, let's say like a friend of mine, she's disabled and she'd love to work, but she can't, so she has to receive from the government, which is, you know, which is all good. Yeah, I don't judge them. You know, it's like we're all, you know, we're all in different levels or whatever, or we're all in different situations. I hate the word levels. It sounds so freaking spiritual crap.
It sounds like we're at a mall, you know, like you're on like the first level of the mall.
You know, new level, new devil. You know, new level, new whatever. It's like, how about you just be a decent person? Do you need? Fill a need.
Yeah. But I'm not saying that this passage, has calls for a particular social policy. I think my point, is just sort of more, we don't focus on, why aren't we looking carefully at this passage to see sort of, what this is calling us to do? Why are people so focused on, the verses that are very close to those that deal with, that they say deal with gay people, and just kind of ignoring so much other, that's in the Old Testament and Leviticus particularly.
Well, you've already said it before, Brian. The people that speak out against us and don't use these passages about sharing the crop. Sharing the crop would like sharing what their profits would require them to do something.
Yeah.
Them not being LGBT doesn't require them to do something because they're not LGBT.
No. It's let's define sin in such a way that I can never be guilty of it.
I mean, how many times do you like church people call like lies white lies?
Well, what about defining sin as who you are or what you're doing? Like if you're eating shrimp, you're sinning. If you're being yourself, you're sinning because you're transgender, or you're not who I think you should be and whose image and whatnot. So
and the clothing you wear, synthetic versus and stuff like that,
they're blended. You're going to hell.
Like, what are you wearing now, Jade?
Shirt. I don't know. More clothes.
You see, we don't think about we don't think about synthetic and all that kind of stuff. No. Although the Bible, I mean, if we're going to be literal about the Bible, it's in there.
You're working after a certain hour. You're working on a Saturday. You're working on the Sabbath. You're gonna stone you. However, there wasn't it there's a certain sect. I saw something on the internet about there's this cable in major cities that are where some Jews live, where it's a certain encompassing the whole perimeter of that region, so they can go out and do everything within the region of the law.
Yeah.
So whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's in New York City, and they have like rabbis that go out and like check the strings and make sure that they're all
connected,
kind of properly, whatever. Mhm.
Anyway,
It claims that like as long as you're in your household or something, and I'm paraphrasing. As long as you're in your own household, you could do certain things that you couldn't do outside of your household on a Sabbath. And by putting this imaginary line around Manhattan, certain blocks in Manhattan, then you could claim this whole area as your household, I guess.
yeah.
Something like that.
It's called the Eruv. It was first established 2,000 years ago to allow Jews to more realistically follow the laws of Sabbath rest, particular one, no carrying on the Sabbath. According to the laws of Sabbath rest, nothing can be carried from the domestic zone into the public zone on Saturday. So no carrying house keys or wallet, no pushing a baby stroller. So it extends the domestic zone into the public zone, permitting activities within it that would normally be forbidden to observant Jews on the Sabbath. And it is a fishing line that encircles Manhattan, protecting the sanctity of the Sabbath.
Mm.
So there you go, Gary.
But it's not real.
Gary texted me like, "What are you talking about?"
But to me, it's not a very realistic way to observe the Sabbath, though. It's like,
Hey, always in a loophole, baby. Always find the loophole.
Yeah, very legalistic.
Right? That's why I had a great career as an attorney. You know, always find there's the law and you always find a way around it. No, I'm just kidding. That's not what I did. That's not
Better
what I
call Saul.
did. Yeah, right?
Saul Goodman.
Yep. So as we're wrapping up, I do want to leave space. I know maybe hard to kind of jump in, Andrew, but I do want to just leave space. If you'd like to share anything or have any questions or comments, just leave space. Don't feel required to. I just want to make sure that you know that you're welcome to interject and say anything. So
Oh yeah, this is my first time actually reading through that story. So
okay, cool.
This is actually the first time that I've heard this story, believe it or not. I mean, from a hetero or, any kind of standpoint, this is the first time I've heard this story.
Of Ruth and Naomi, like
Yeah.
generally, or the whole Boaz?
Generally. That's how,
Huh.
yeah, this was new to me.
Interesting. I think it just sort of underscores how, we think of like Christianity as like a monolith, like, oh no, this is Christianity, like this is what it is, and even those of us, people who grew up in different backgrounds, kind of came from Christian backgrounds or not, sort of think that everybody sort of had a similar background. I think this sort of shows that no, there's all sorts of different Christianities that we think is sort of one thing, and everybody thinks they've got the right version of it, and just sort of underscores, I think, how we have like this little piece and then another person has this little piece. And it's only if we put all this together do we have any hope of even coming close to seeing like, the truer image of God and the truer image of the divine. And so by saying, I don't want to see your piece, you leave the church, like people are saying that Nikki was saying they had done to them, then I think you really miss out on the fullness of what God has to offer.
I think from my experience, having been a part of different denominational stuff and Bible studies and stuff like that, and now coming to a point where I'm not denominational, but I've learned a lot from denominational different points of view. I've been on kind of like this journey of discovering I'm not saying I know everything or I know the absolute, right, one way to do anything, but I'm figuring out the truth among that's there among the sometimes lies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. in my theology class in seminary for this year, the main text, and I'm looking at it across the way, is faith seeking understanding. And I think that's a really great way to think about what we're all, at least what I'm trying to do, by participating in this group, by going to First Baptist. It's just kind of, like faith, seeking some understanding of God, of the divine. Not someone who thinks I have all the answers or will ever have all the answers, quite honestly.
Well,
And I think for anyone that says that they have all the answers, then they haven't read the Bible.
Well, and they're not asking questions.
Because
They're not asking the right questions.
And in one part in the New Testament, it says that we don't have all the answers. We're not going to have all the answers. I'm paraphrasing, but it pretty much says that we're not going to have all the answers, know everything.
humans.
Yeah.
What is man?
After you stop recording, don't turn the Zoom meeting off.
Okay.
I have a question.